my current training partner, Jeff. No, everything that's beyond my control is just like it's beyond my control. I can't do anything about it, so I don't care.
Is there a link between that approach to your physical practice?
In the sense that I guess that they are inseparable, yes. I like this idea that I think both Frederick Alexander and Moshe Feldenkrais describes a person as the self. And we had this experiment when I went to dance school where we weren't allowed for a while to talk about the mind and the body. Like it was just, we had to try and use the term the self just to see how it influenced us. Like you just have to, you can only talk about yourself as the self. You can't say like, oh, like my body this or my brain that. Like you have, they just made this like academic experiment, like seeing what happens if you make a bunch of students just refer to the self for a while. Because that that's like all incorporating.
Okay, so not separating it.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, I'm not. I mean, my physical practice is me. My mental attitude towards problems is me. Things that I like to geek out on intellectually is me. So I think they're all like in one. It's all one big clusterfuck of intentions and reactions to stuff.
Is that something that has stuck with you since dance school?
Yeah, I think for sure. Yeah, and I think a lot of dancers, maybe people who are more physical in general and use more somatic terms, would place the idea of more in the body and not necessarily just like what my brain thinks is who I am. If we go down the road of kind of critical thinking and rationality, if you think of the brain as an organ, then this idea of separating the brain, though it like the brain is definitely, it has the primary responsibility for a bunch of cognitive actions, right? And that's why we separate. We say it does the majority of cognitive work is done by the brain, so the brain is separate from the rest. But the brain only functions because it is part of the rest. And if I had to make this kind of reasoning about the brain, then there's a big chance, at least, that I had to be able to do that with the rest of my body as well. Like I would have to consider my kidneys as something separate from the rest as well, because they do the majority of the cleaning part of my body. But I'm not talking about, like there's my body and then there's my kidneys part of my body. And then there's the liver is part of my body. And also I have the brain part of my body. Like it's all one big thing. And if you cut my head off, the brain won't matter much in the same way that body won't matter much. So I'm not sure why we're doing this separation so why the separation is so stark.
Do you think we're overanalyzing? Do we break things down overly?
Yeah, the separation I think is definitely I think it's a Western concept initially, at least, and I think there's a lot of like when I came into Muay Thai recently, someone told me that kicks to the body score higher than punches to the face because the body's no, but the body is considered more as part of the self than the head. Like the head is highest, but the body is the center of you.
Well, I guess that is true. Because we want to talk about the torso being more of the center. That's where most of our energy centers are lined up. If we want to go with that route, right? That's where most of our vital organs are.
I also think when you start moving more, like discourse we use in any given community is very important in terms of how we think of things, and at the same time it's totally not important at all because people make up their own mind about things. But I do think that discourse shapes how we think of whatever to a very high degree. And the fact that you are constantly being reminded that this is your brain and this is your body, I think that makes you think differently, because I think dancers are just used to operating in
the one single unit, right?
Yeah, it's a single unit, because there's also this thing that they said, like after a while you can record that most people observe with their eyes, which are of course part of the face and very clearly connected to the brain. Most people observe movements with their eyes, process it, and then try to kind of verbally translate it to the rest of the body. And at some point, when you've picked up enough choreography, that link is kind of like that gap is diminished. like you observe, you become kind of thinking body. You observe and you copy as you see,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you just
yeah.
go. Like I'm not think. I still remember. I've danced for short enough time to be lucky enough to still remember. Okay, she takes 3 steps and then she lifts her left arm and then I turn here. But that doesn't happen anymore. I just see something and then I do that thing that I see, and it's more on a reflexive level.
Yeah. It becomes more of a it's like an automated pathway. It doesn't need to be paved anymore. The synapses don't need to be created anymore. They're already built there. Foundation's already there.
I've gone more away, and I try to teach sometimes my students. I think it's important to teach both, but I try to teach my students and myself to both verbalize things in a very concrete, intellectual manner, but also to talk more about how things feel. Like I think ultimately when you connect with things, it's a physical sensation.
Yes.
When you're trying to, whenever you feel like your squat is like, today was a great squat, I will still bet that for most people, even the most cognitive oriented or analytical as I am myself, when a squat feels great, or when a sparring session feels great, it's a physical sensation more than a verbalization in the head, right?
But I guess
and
that
by
would
that
be like
account,
a feedback message that goes into your head, because if it feels good, then great, you're gonna think that is good. But if it feels unfamiliar, if you felt awkward, or if you felt foolish, or if you felt kind of self-defeated, then the feedback loop into your inner dialogue changes. And when that changes, your performance changes. Like when you spar in Muay Thai, if just one thing throws you off, how would that affect the way you go in again? You know, would you go in with the same type of aggression, with the same type of like guts, and or would you start to be, oh shit, I'm starting to doubt myself now?
Fighting is super complex, because as opposed to dancing, there's a lot more influence from another person. So I feel it's somehow hard to explain. But there definitely happens these kind of like negative or positive spirals, like negative reinforcement, self-reinforcement, positive self-reinforcement. Like that is somewhat beyond your control, that pushes you in one direction or another. And the only thing you have to rely on is a few simple tools that you've kind of tried to ingrain into your own practice, right? Like when you're fighting, you don't have the time to really analyze and think too much. Like you can to a certain extent, but a lot of it is just like, remember to kind of cut angles. Like it's something like, but that works a lot better for me personally when it turns out to be a feeling. When there is that feeling of like, just keep cutting those angles so their attacks don't matter as much and your attacks matter more. And if I keep having that feeling of like, it's just that, step into their space, step into their space, step into their space. Like
so
that
just
feeling...
having that one thought that you can just focus on. It's relevant.
Yeah, when it's not even a thought anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's like a swing thought. For example, in golfers, whenever they want to just focus on each one, they have a swing thought. They don't think about all of the body positions. They just have one thought. Flip. Or like for basketball, they keep the elbows in, something like that, just to have one swing thought. Your thought process with dancing, your thought process with Muay Thai, your thought process with parkour. Each of them will have its own, I guess, struggle in your inner dialogue. Each of them will have its own doubt.
The funny thing with parkour, as opposed to how it's usually portrayed and how most people think of it, is I actually think parkour, if it comes to dance or fighting, I think parkour is the most controlled. It's also the discipline that I do with the most inherent risk of big injuries, but because the inherent risk is high, but the manner in which we practice is very controlled, very few injuries happen. Parkour is usually facing very few, very big obstacles that you're chipping away at kind of one step at a time. Whereas both dance and fighting, and even fighting even more so, has kind of like a constant sensorial overload where you almost, unless you feel really safe with the people you're, for example, sparring with, you constantly on that edge of like, this kind of feels dangerous and I don't really like being in this position, but I have to accept it, and that's how I grow. Parkour, you go up and you look at something, and the prospects of what could happen is terrifying, and then you can just step away. And that's it. And then you come back again a couple of weeks after, and you're like, okay, I've practiced stuff that feels similar to this jump that I can't break. So now I look at it again, and it feels kind of better. And then maybe you're standing and your hands start getting sweaty and you're standing there for 5 minutes and you can be like, still not today. And then you come back again and you're slowly chipping away at this big thing. And for me, that has been exciting in terms of how fear management, like everything else, it seems when you get further into it, like training, like a big underestimated part of strength training is it's just very, very specific. Everything you train is very, very specific. And the spillover effects, sometimes more surprising than we think, but very often more limited than we think. My constant practice of fear management in parkour, in terms of jumping in heights, did not transfer very well to managing fear when being punched in the face.
No, that's completely different. And yeah, I hear you. I completely hear you. Jumps are definitely one of my biggest nemesis in parkour.
Yeah.
So and thank you for expanding on that. I think it's very beneficial for people to hear how multi-skilled practitioners like ourselves, because we're so interested in doing many things, and how we approach things differently. And I think you articulated just so well. I'm really looking forward to your course, by the way. Ascending Strength.
Yeah,
all right. Well, thank you. I think we'll definitely be able to expand on the 2-hour-long conversation we have committed to.
Yeah, that'll be very nice. Yeah, see you soon.
I'll see you soon
Thanks
once this whole thing is safe enough for us to travel.